Morning, Gary.
Morning, Guy.
We are in the Motor City.
We are Detroit, home of Motown and Iggy.
Yeah, and also, it's Motown and Detroit Rock City.
Is that what they call it?
Iggy, right? Alice Cooper, yeah.
Alice Cooper, of course, who's been on the show. Would love to have Iggy, obviously. But we
would love to have Iggy. Anyone listening?
In his own time. But it's been fun so far on the road, I think. It's been fun. It's been hard work. It's been quite grueling, lots of shows. I've had a bad cold, which I've worked my way through.
Well, which you got after me. I started off the tour terribly. I had 2 shows where it was really worrying whether I was even going to get through it. And then it was your turn.
But good audiences. What have we been to see? Where have we been? Anything exciting?
Chicago. But
Chicago was great, wasn't it? Yeah.
Chicago was fantastic.
Yeah.
Boston was fantastic. Everyone's been fantastic. Audiences have been fantastic.
In Philadelphia, we went down to see the
exchange rate has been less than fantastic.
In Philadelphia, we went to the old studio where Bowie recorded, of course. But it was,
and Gamble and Huff, of course, yes.
Gamble, but it wasn't there. But that's sort of the
car park. It's a car park.
Yes,
which in a way is kind of, at least it's not luxury flats.
So anyway, we continue still doing Rockonteurs while we're on tour. Have you met Thomas Dolby, Guy?
I haven't met Thomas Dolby. No, never. But I did go to a very interesting gig of his, which we'll get to. Have you met him?
Yeah, I did. I sort of hung out with him a little bit in Los Angeles, where he lived, and I lived in the early 90s, and I remember him sort of having vague ideas about putting polyphonic music onto video games at the time, which I think it was an area he went into rather successfully.
And ringtones. Funnily enough, he's probably had a bigger impact on everyone's lives through not doing music than most musicians get to do with music.
That's right. But also he's got some fantastic stories. And, names that might crop up on the way are obviously David Bowie, Michael Jackson, Foreigner, Def Leppard. I mean, he's certainly been part of this world.
He absolutely has. And he tells them well from what I've heard. So he's a perfect Rockonteur fodder.
Let's get him on.
Welcome to the Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
That's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
I've listened to a few of them and they've been really good, man. I've been sitting in the back of the car coming into London. They're brilliant.
Thank you guys for still being around, still making music, still being into it, and doing this podcast. It's fabulous.
So great to talk to 2 guys that have done this.
Remember me? I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Keep on rocking!
Good morning.
Thomas. Hello.
Where are you?
So nice to see
you. Where
you.
are you guys?
We're in Detroit.
Oh.
Where are you?
Did you play last night?
No, we're playing tonight.
Oh, right. Okay.
You're in a rather splendid studio. What's that? Where's that?
This is just my home. We live in Baltimore in a sort of industrial loft.
The last I heard, you were in England with a studio in a boat.
Yeah. Well, I have that as well. But so I'm teaching at university now, so I get long summers off. So I go from about May to August. And that's a house in Suffolk that we still have, and my kids are there, so that's good. But the rest of the year I'm here.
Because you jump around a lot, don't you? Because I've known you. Once you're in America, then you're back in England. Then you're in America. You're in England. How is that for you? Is your home where your synthesizer is?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I've been coming since I was quite young, and my wife is from here. My 3 kids were born here. So it's definitely home away from home. And although I was born in London and I lived there from sort of 16 onwards, it never really felt like home. Actually, I have rather bad memories of London.
Oh,
it's like, Gary, the way you talk to Americans, they go, "Oh, I love London," and you go, "Yeah, where'd you stay?" I go, "Hampstead, Knightsbridge."
Yeah.
There's 2 Londons, mate. Yeah. Memories, standing at the bus stop in the rain waiting for a bus with the rain and the pigeon shit dripping down my neck, and a sort of greasy kebab in my hand.
Because you actually, I heard an interview with you where you were talking about when you used to do the sound for kind of post-punk bands at Dingwalls and places like that. And I remember, because my memories of that whole world are, in fact, the first time I ever heard your name, I can remember exactly the moment I heard of you and heard you at the same time, which was when I was round at my friend Simon Lloyd's house, and he had the Golden Age of Wireless, and he said, "This is an album I've just played on." He was a sax player in the Members, and he played various weird reed instruments on your first album.
He did. That's right. Yeah. And in fact, I did a gig at I engineered a gig at Dingwalls for the Members, and it was Nicky Tesco's birthday.
Oh, I did. Dear departed Nicky, sadly.
I did not know.
Yeah, that's last year. Yeah.
We had this massive birthday cake that came from Tesco or something. And of course, the pogoing punks at the front decided it would be a good idea, to turn this cake into a weapon. And it was my wedge monitors, with the grills. And I spent about the next month sort of poking the stale chocolate cake out of my grills.
Oh, was it your own PA? It wasn't your own PA. You didn't have.
It was, I remember the foldback system was definitely mine. I think maybe it was their PA. I don't really remember.
I just always remember those little PA companies that did that when you did pub gigs back then, and there would be the old sort of hippie-ish bloke and his incredibly bored girlfriend who used to come around. And it was 30 quid.
Yes. Well, people would get it. People would be asked to be in bands because they owned a little PA.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was a bit like, the kid who had the football had to be in the team.
Well, David Lee Roth was like that, wasn't he?
Access to the van. Yeah. But I've always thought, because there's always been this thing of there are people, that now old men, sitting in castles and palaces around the world who know they're there because they could use their brother's van.
Hopefully you still got it so they can take the furniture away when they have to vacate the premises.
But Thomas, what was your ambition to be at that point? Was that the way you saw yourself going, as someone in the technical side of music?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I left school and I was interested in electronic music first and foremost, and experimental film. And there was really nothing, I'm from a very academic family, and they probably would have liked me to go to college and stuff, but there was really nothing for me. And I fell into, I roadied a bit, and then I sort of fell into doing front of house mixing, which I was good at. And so I did that for a couple of years, really, but I was also playing keyboards and sort of trying to get into bands on the side. And you remember Melody Maker was, the back of Melody Maker was, you would look for gigs, and so I would go to auditions for gigs like that. And eventually I did get a job, as a keyboard player with a retainer, and that was with Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club. And so at that point I sort of gave up my my engineering, but it was a good sort of night gig, and it was during the sort of, I suppose, post-punk era. So I engineered for the Gang of Four, various different sort of bands, and then my bread and butter actually was engineering for a Jamaican funk soul band doing US Air Force bases.
Which one?
They were called JALN, which stood for Just Another Lonely Night. And they dressed up sort of like the Commodores or something, But then it was all like, they come off stage afterwards and they go, "That's not mine, you can't play any over a bass chord." Like it was quite stage. There are only lovers in the honest
But Bruce Woolley sounds like a match made in heaven for you, really, obviously, because he goes on and he's very involved in the Fairlight, and he's very involved in with Buggles and Trevor Horn. Did he spot this sort of wunderkind coming up who had a like-minded love of the future?
You'd have to ask Bruce that, but I would imagine yes. What was amazing at the time was that he had a record deal and a management company, and that he had a hit song in the charts. It's before before Trevor Horn was really sort of known as a producer. But we were sort of, I suppose, you know, we wore these space cadet outfits, and I suppose we were sort of prototype. It wasn't really new romantic, you know. We didn't have any sort of fluffy, bits on our clothes.
Careful.
Well, no, I remember because I knew Nigel who was the second bass player in the Camera Club, but I always thought they kind of fell between two stools a bit. Was slightly the problem? Do you know what I mean? Because you were either pop or you were new wave, or you were either NME or you were.
I think you got that exactly right, actually, and I think because we also had a version of Video Killed the Radio Star, which Bruce co-wrote with Trevor and Jeff Downs. And whereas Trevor's was very poppy and novelty and so on, we had a sort of rockier, you know, more hardcore version of it, and we were actually out there playing clubs and things. But, you know, Trevor's version went to #1 all over the world, and we sort of sank without trace. But, you know, Bruce is extremely talented, really super nice guy, and a big influence on me, you know, as a songwriter as well. So I think melodically.
He co-wrote Slave to the Rhythm, didn't he?
He did, yeah. I mean, he's done various collaborations with Trevor over the years. And these days, you know, he plays the theremin. There's a band called the Radio Science Orchestra, who use sort of, you know, unusual hybrid instruments and stuff like that. And he makes, you know, sort of experimental Super 8 films in a warehouse in Twickenham and things. So I mean, he does amazing stuff. I mean, he's a very talented guy.
I just want to touch on this before I go back and find out why you wanted to be a synthesizer player and where that first synthesizer came from. This, you know, you mentioned the theremin, and I've seen pictures of Bruce, you know, dressed up in 1930s clothes and stuff, and I'm thinking of landscape, of what stuff you did, and I'm thinking there was a kind of nostalgia for the future rather than a real belief in the future. There was a sort of, you know, people, not just, I mean, you're playing synthesizers, you're making sounds that no one's heard before, but you're looking back to sort of Dan Dare and Radiotronics and things that were from the 30s and 40s in a way, and with a sense of humor as well. There are two things here. One, it begs the question, why looking back and looking forward at the same time? And also, why somehow contain it with humor?
Yeah, no,
you see my point, Thomas?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's dead right. I mean, you know, hindsight is 20/20, as they say. But yeah, I mean, it was sort of things that used to be modern. You know, I mean, synthesizers date back to, you know, early in the 20th century. I once met an elderly Russian music professor, and he remembers at the Kremlin when there was a presentation by Leon Theremin of his invention, you know, before World War II. And the result of that was that Leon Theremin was sent off to Siberia to invent like weapons. I mean, you know, they saw his invention and they assigned him to doing, you know, detonators or something like that. So, I mean, it dates back a long way. And I think throughout the 20th century, yeah, there was this sort of optimism for the future, coupled to a sort of terror of it, which was very compelling. And yeah, I mean, we took a humorous aspect, you know, sort of approach to it, and tried to incorporate that into what we did. And I suppose that was, you know, although it didn't have the trappings of steampunk in terms of the goggles and the cogs and stuff like that, what it shared was this sort of affectionate view of sort of old science fiction and how things may have turned out differently.
Yeah, Quatermass one. Also, if you look, I mean, science fiction, I guess if you look at the 80s, you're talking about, you've gone from 2001 to sort of Brazil and Blade Runner.
Yeah, but is there something else in it for you, Thomas, that is where it's not, you're not wearing your heart on your sleeve in your lyrics and your music? That I'm not suggesting it's a way of hiding, but you were just removing yourself and becoming an observer and a witty observer. Were you more comfortable as a songwriter in that mode?
Yeah, I mean, I tended to veer away from sort of conversational relationship lyrics, you know, which a lot of pop music is sort of based around. So, and I tended to talk about geography and submarines and things like that. Yeah. So was I more comfortable? Yeah. The flip side was it distressed me when, there was a sort of Luddite attitude to new technology as well. It's not real music, the machines, you just hit go and they just play themselves.
There was a big musicians union backlash as well, wasn't there? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Yeah. Actually, I remember sitting in a musicians union meeting, which lots of our generation didn't, pay much attention to the musicians union. It wasn't really clear what they did for us.
Well, you joined because it was a closed shop, and if you didn't, you couldn't go on top of the pops.
Exactly.
That's why you joined the MU.
Yeah. So a bunch of us turned up to a meeting on the agenda of which was a motion saying we propose that string synthesizers should be banned forever. And there was a meeting like at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and about 10 of us showed up, to sort of speak up on behalf of synthesizers. And the other 70 members, sort of flugelhorn players and things, were like half asleep until it came to the vote, all those in favor of banning synthesizers forever. Oh yeah, these hands went up, and 10 of us were looking around going, so we gave these impassioned speeches, and the vote went the other way anyway. But it got swept under the carpet because, of course, it wasn't. There's no way it was going to stick. But it's amazing to think that the MU actually voted to ban synthesizers altogether.
Well, it's like Ferriers trying to ban the train.
Yeah, but it's also, especially when you look back and remember what string synthesizers actually sounded like.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about you as a kid discovering that sound? You mentioned electronic music. I guess you were discovering it in the same way I discovered it through Bowie. I mean, his trip to Berlin.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that was, think before he did that, how we were all watching, every move he made, every time, there was an article came out or whatever. And he wasn't doing interviews at the time, but there'd be some piece in NME, about his new direction or whatever, and then the album would come out and you queue up to get it, and you get it and bring it home and you pour over the credits and the lyrics and just play it back to back. And I remember when that new album was low, and it was like, oh my goodness, it's like completely from another planet. And then you gradually found out about Eno and Visconti and going to Berlin and playing at Hansa. And it was like, oh, there's all of that, it's like, so like a flock of sheep, we all sort of went, oh, okay, let's go over here, and it just sounded amazing. It was so ballsy, to use machines to make pop music. I mean, just extraordinary. So that was a huge influence. And I think what was interesting about that was that when you brought synthesizers and machines to the fore like that, they have an inherent sort of, Cold War vibe to them a little bit. There's something a little bit icy about working with a machine. And, a lot of people went down that road and let machines sound like machines with all of their quirks and made that into a thing, and the vocals and the lyrics went along with that. I mean, think Gary Newman, on Top of the Pops doing Our Friends Electric or whatever. But it was actually, that wasn't what it was about really for me. I sort of touched on that, but what it was really about was that I like the idea of all of those different timbres, so I'm really sort of a frustrated orchestrator. I love the idea of creating all these different textures. And what I was going for was warmth really, rather than frostiness. So I think with a lot of my early stuff, I was sort of trying to find the warmth and the humanity, that these machines would be capable of if they were used as a sort of, as a form of expression really by the artist.
Listening to your early records now, Thomas, which has been great fun to revisit, is realizing how you were actually very ahead of the curve in terms of because synth records, the early 80s, were very, very simple. If you think of soft sound and everything was one or two things. And you had very complex arrangements where you had various synths doing what would be classically defined parts for things, which became, I would say, a lot of your stuff became very much a benchmark for your classic pop arrangement of the later 80s.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the first Spandau Ballet album, every track was just like one synth playing a riff.
Yeah.
It's...
Right, which is the more straightforward thing to do. I mean, but also a lot of bands like Spandau Ballet that didn't, strictly speaking, have a keyboard player who specialized in it. It's just that somebody would get their hands on a synth and do something neat with it, you know. Obviously, there are exceptions. I mean, you know, Duran Duran, for example, had a specialist keyboard player who was originating a lot of the stuff. But a lot of bands like you guys, you know, XTC was another example where, you know, the guitarist would get a hold of a synth and do something cool with it. But often that would be a riff, you know, rather than a full arrangement.
You used the Fairlight early on, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I mean, I
went to their place in Potts Point back in '82. I remember
Okay, all right. So I mean, you would remember at the time that was actually quite an exclusive little club of people getting Fairlight demos in 1982.
There was absolutely. There was one guy I knew who had one in London, Chris Warwick.
And then Landscape went on Tomorrow's World and demoed the Fairlight. And you remember that guy on Tomorrow's World that would sort of sit on a stool and tell you about the future?
No, it wasn't.
It was right before Top of the Pops on a Thursday night.
With his long face. But Stevie Wonder had the Fairlight first, didn't he? Was he one of the earliest? No?
You know, the guy that invented the Fairlight told me a funny story, because the guy that invented the Fairlight knew nothing about music at all. I mean, he just sort of did it because it was possible. And in fact, when Stevie Wonder was touring Australia and asked if they could bring a Fairlight up to his hotel suite, and he said, "Who the fuck is Stevie Wonder?" But yeah, I mean, I actually, you know, my first advance from EMI, I'll tell you exactly how I spent it, because it was about $100,000, and with 24,
which is what Madonna would get today.
I know. With the first 24,000 of that, I bought a flat in Fulham, and with the remaining 76,000, I bought a Fairlight.
Oh my god!
76.
And in retrospect, if I bought 4 flats in Fulham,
Thomas, just explain to people what a Fairlight does, and it becomes even funnier.
Yes, I mean, you know, if people are familiar with a mellotron, you know, and Strawberry Fields, where, you know, you record a note, a flute playing a note on every note of the keyboard, and then a tape plays it back. Well, Fairlight is basically like a digital version of that. So you take a digital recording of a sound, and then you lay it out across a keyboard so you can play it back. So that could be anything from a drum kit to, you know, sampling an orchestra. So now you have like a string section, you know. But I mean, in the early days, because of computing power, you had this big thing the size of a tumble dryer, basically, and it could do 8 sounds at a time, so it's slightly under a second a piece. And then you had like a page on your computer and a pen where you would draw in notes, and you had 8 voices at your disposal. So you could basically, you know, pick 8 sounds, 1 note each, and try and come up with whole arrangements with them. And it was very different at the time. And you felt like a damn pioneer, because only Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel had them, you know. So so everything you did sort of felt very original.
Well, everyone just used the orchestra sound, didn't they? Everyone just went rank.
Right, exactly.
But you could do it on your phone now, right? Kids do it on their phone now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could do a lot more on your phone, you know, with a free app than you could do back then.
But it also had the page where you could just draw waves, couldn't you?
With a light pen drilling. Yeah. The whole episode of Tomorrow's World was devoted just to that light pen. I put my Fairlight away, you know, for years, and I was living on the West Coast, and I had this sort of shed, like in the back garden, that I stored my old flight cases in and stuff. My Fairlight had been in there for a few years, and the Fairlight themselves asked if they could have it for the Fairlight Museum. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I went out there and I unlocked this shed, and the weeds had grown up through the floor. And Fairlight, if you remember, had a sort of this chassis, you know, with sort of grills on it. And the weeds had sort of grown through the Fairlight, and it was like the earth was trying to swallow it back up again. It was fantastic. I needed a machete to get it out of there.
Because I remember when I went to the workshop, they had what they were proudest of. They had their first big bit of press they'd had, which I think was from the Sydney Morning Herald. And I said, "This machine could replace the home organ."
Was one of the first things that you wrote that
cost more than your home, but
was the Lene Lovich track one of the first things you ended up successfully writing and getting onto the radio?
Yes, because when I was with Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club, we toured the USA supporting Lene Lovich, who had a following there, and we were playing sort of clubs and theatres and things. And I was bowled over by Lene. I was completely in awe of her. I'd never actually spoken to her or anything. But it's just when the first 4-track cassette had come out. Do you remember those? It's like a cassette you could record on both sides of, and it had a little mixer on it. So in my hotel room, I was writing. Yeah, Porter Studio. I had a keyboard and this thing in my hotel room every night, and I was writing, and I was so impressed with Lene that I wrote this song for her. And I sort of slipped it to her partner, Les Chappell, in an envelope with a cassette and a little note in it, sort of fanboy note. And I had a dream. This is Rockonteurs, right? I have to tell you this story because it's kind of great. I had a dream that Lene while I was on tour, that Lene and I were going to move into a flat together, an apartment together. And I thought this apartment was in New York or Paris or somewhere, because it's like it went from block to block. So there's big windows at either end and a partition in the middle, and it was empty. And Lene was walking from one side to the other going, I can only see 2 rooms here. I could swear there were 3 rooms, but I can only see 2. This is my dream. So I wrote this down in this note to Lene. I sent her the song. Didn't hear anything about it at all. About 3 months later, I get a call saying from the record company saying Lena's interested in routining your song and seeing if it would work for her band. Would you come down to a rehearsal room? So I went down and everything, and I didn't mention this note, but I ended up, she covered the song, we did it, it went in the charts and everything. And then they told me they were going to do a video for it, and they gave me this address in Soho Square, London, to show up to. And I walk up the stairs and I walk into this apartment, and God damn it, it's the apartment from the dream. Whoa. Right. And I never thought of it as London because I'd never been to a place like that in London, but it was the apartment from the dream. And in the middle of the room, they'd set up this parachute with fans blowing through it. And they wanted the band to walk through this parachute in the middle of the room. And I was just stunned by that. I'm not at all woo-woo, right? I've never had supernatural experience or anything, but I was just completely stunned by this. And eventually I became friendly with Lene and everything. And one night I decided I was going to tell her this whole story and see what she made of it. So I told her the story like I've told you. And she said, oh, Tom, you didn't, I gave your note to the location manager. And I said, find me an apartment like drives in.
Oh, did that burst the bubble a little bit, or was that just even more wonderful?
A bit.
Yeah, but because when you were describing your dream, I was thinking, wow, you actually dream in 80s video storyboards.
Yeah. His dreams are backlit with rain and smoke.
Pictures of Jap girls in synthesis.
While you were away, didn't you? Is that when you got a call about working with Foreigner?
No. Well, no, I got back, after that US tour, I got back to London, and now I was pushing my songs. I think this was before New Toy came out. I was pushing my songs, and I was really, really trying to get a deal, and without much joy. And I was very badly in debt. And I actually sort of fled London and went to Paris, where a school friend of mine was working as a busker in the metro. And Matthew Seligman, who you mentioned, was living in my flat in London. And he called me and he said, yeah, Mick Jones is trying to get a hold of you. And I'm like, that's great. Mick Jones, fantastic. He said, oh, I don't think it's that Mick Jones.
Not the one from The Clash.
So I discovered there was another Mick Jones. I didn't know much about Foreigner, who, as you remember, we're not all that well known in the UK, but obviously massive in the US. And they were in New York.
Hang on, just to fill people in, Mick Jones, the Mick Jones you're talking about from Foreigner, is also Mark Ronson's stepfather.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. I'd forgotten that. That's true. And he's a Brit. Actually, most of Foreigner were English.
Well, started by the guy from King Crimson, the saxophone player, right. The famous, what's his name, Ian MacDonald.
They were in New York recording what turned out to be Foreigner 4 with Mutt Lange, and they were getting towards the end, and they'd put keyboards on the album, but they weren't very happy with them. And they asked that they'd heard my demo tape, because Mutt was a partner in Zomba Music, a publishing company. I sent it to Zomba Music. Mutt heard it and liked the keyboard playing. And so he thought, well, let's take a, Hail Mary, let's try this young synthesizer player on that. So they flew me over from Paris. It's like, of course, I had a busy schedule, on my backside in the Paris metro, but I took a couple of days out of my busy schedule, to fly to New York. And they liked what I did. And so I ended up staying a month. And, they hadn't really done ballads before then. So they wanted me to sort of enrich. They had a couple of ballads on the album. They wanted me to sort of enrich them, but they had this deadline. So during the day, they were doing vocals, and they would leave me at night with a relief engineer, all night with any keyboard that I wanted to hire from SIR, off a laminated sheet, and they'd come back in the morning. So, I'd never been in a proper recording studio before. So this is kind of fantastic. And so I recorded that stuff. And, among the stuff that I recorded, was this intro to Waiting for a Girl Like You, where I'd heard about this technique where you could record a note on each track of a multi-track and then use the faders like a mellotron. So you could sort of, so you put down a bunch of notes just sustained, and then you could push the faders up and down.
This is like isn't this like the 10cc did with vocals for I'm Not in Love?
Exactly, that's what I heard. That I think I read about this in an interview with Lol Cream or something like that they'd done this, and I thought it'd be nice to try it with synth. So I did this intro for Waiting for a Girl Like You, and sort of we stuck it on the front of that song, and it came out. It's like a huge hit, and so then you just would hear it everywhere, and I'd be in a Hertz rental car in Detroit, Michigan, and FM radio would come on with this sort of ambient intro, and everybody said, that's a bit different for Foreigner. I wonder who did that. So
I think there's a story about when the band first heard it, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, they one morning they came in and I played this intro to them and hit stop, and there was sort of a silence, and the bass player, I can't remember his name, but the bass player said, "It's a bit like massage music, isn't it?" And he said, "Cool, I could murder a massage."
But did you
not have a feeling though? Because that hook, I mean, the build up soundscape bit is beautiful, but that riff is such it's one of those absolute remember first time you heard it things. It's such a Did you not have a moment when you wrote? Did you not?
Was that yours though, Thomas? Was that yours?
No, I can't take credit for that. No. That was Mick. Mick wrote that. Yeah, no, Mick would play that on a Fender Rhodes, and I can definitely not take credit for that.
But that's weird because that's unlike anything I've heard from them before. That's why I would always assume that was you, because it's not foreignery. Well, I guess you would have brought that sound to it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I said, I picked the sounds, but no, I mean, Mick, he's a great songwriter, and he would write some of his songs on piano, but then sort of play them with guitars and drums. But yeah.
Well, no, sorry, I was going slightly off beam because I was going to say what's an interesting thing with your whole sort of shtick as sort of being the electronic machine guy. How you've always kind of seemed to had a very tight knit. I know you've been very close to groups of musicians. The people you work with. I
love what happens when musicians get in a room together. I mean, sometimes, but because it's different. The thing about machines is this: that you can program a machine, you can get it to sound really good, but the next thing you program knows nothing about the first thing. Just the machines sort of do as they're told, hopefully, but they don't listen to each other, so they don't respond to each other. And when musicians are playing together, it's like, if you could analyze the waveforms and the physics of what's happening, and then what's happening in their brain chemistry, there's just so much going on that in 100 years we couldn't get AI to replicate what's happening there. And this is true whether it's like a bunch of jazzers just sort of improvising in a room, or in fact, when an orchestra is playing on stage. It's not, and this is why sampling doesn't do it justice, because when a violinist is playing and there are open strings resonating, and then his neighbor's opening strings are resonating, and the piano lid is open and the timpanis are ringing a bit, and there's a sound under the stage and the sound back from the room, and all of that, everybody is processing in minute detail, and it ends up in the tips of their fingers, as they're playing. And so there's so much going on. I mean, the computing power it would take to replicate that. And the more you work with machines, the more you realize that they're dumb. They're building blocks.
But also that there's an emotional communication that goes on, a mood, and it's interesting because you never really know who's in charge of that. It's a bit like, if you've ever played, the glass in a séance, when you're finding letters and spelling out a word, someone is pushing it, but no one knows who. When you're performing in front of an audience, there's normally a group of people, or maybe one person, who sets the mood, who decides it's going to be an audience who finds humour or finds gravitas, and that's something impossible to put into a computer, isn't it? Because
it is really amazing. There's I don't know if you know Eddie Izzard, right? The comedian.
Yeah,
so there's one video he did it, and I don't know if he did this every night, but he comes on stage and the audience is clapping, and he sort of does one of those, and the audience, and then he says, right, we're going to sing a song, and he goes, and they just start saying, the whole audience is improvising a song, and it's actually a tune.
There's a Bobby McFerrin thing like that, which is absolutely amazing. Which it's him at some science conference, and where he gets a whole audience, and he said wherever he does it in the world, they go to the same pentatonic scale.
I've seen it. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. But talking about being in front of an audience, the different things about, because I came to a gig of yours, Thomas, that was extraordinary. It was absolutely brilliant at the Union Chapel, where you decided to do the Flat Earth with the band. But the deal was you wouldn't get together and rehearse before.
Yeah, we did it in front of the audience. Well, we got together for a drink in a pub, and the drummer said, we should really do a sort of retro tour or gig or something like that. Was there some anniversary of the Flat Earth? And I like the idea of it. I don't really like the idea of like days or weeks in some horrible rehearsal room under the railway arches in Tooting
with your old wedges.
Exactly. So I said, okay, a cool way to do it would be that we don't rehearse, that we just get together on stage and we go through the motions of relearning the songs, and then we take a break, and then we come back and we play them. So that's exactly what we did. So it's like sort of knocking down the fourth wall. And a bit of that, and a bit of a reality show as well, sort of letting the audience in and, to your dirty laundry. And people brought, some of the band members brought photos they'd taken on tour and things like that. We projected them behind, and I basically taught them the songs again. It's like we would stop and start, and I, showed them the parts, and we'd routine the difficult bits. And then we went off and took a break and came back and performed the album. And it was great. It was great fun.
When you had your first big hit, Thomas, and she blinded me with science, how did you feel? You've been a session player, you've been in the side, and how did you now feel about being a pop star? This was definitely age of the pop star as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I felt a bit mixed about it because I'd always been a bit of a, I'm naturally quite introverted. I'd always been a bit of a wallflower. I'm not a particularly social person. I was never the center of attention when I walked in a room. And, it was the age of the pop star, but it was the age of, Adam Ant and Sting and Simon Le Bon and Tony Hadley and all these poster children. And I didn't feel that I could really compete in the handsome boy stakes like that. So I'd sort of,
the lady doesn't protest too much, I feel.
Well, I mean, I'd highlighted a side of me that was sort of quite contrary to that, which was the studious boffin, up all night in the lab, sort of with my machines kind of thing. And I think suddenly being launched into the limelight and having paparazzi and I mean, as you guys well know, people behave very differently when they're face to face with somebody that is larger than life to them, because they're so aware of you via the media and stuff, and they're not really themselves. So, and yet they're also scrutinizing you, looking for bad behavior, looking, to see how much of a diva you are or how much of an ego you've got. But then in the meantime, not being themselves either, So somebody that has sort of social anxiety to begin with, it can be very shocking to get into that situation where everybody around you is behaving very unnaturally. So I wasn't entirely comfortable with it. And there was a side of me that thought, okay, I don't really want to be the one in the spotlight. I'd rather be behind the scenes, pulling the strings, focusing the camera, twiddling the knobs, etc. So I always had, mixed feelings about it, to be honest.
And you made your own video as well. You used to direct your own videos.
I did, yeah. I mean, so when I actually wrote "She Blinded Me with Science," all I really had was a title and an idea for the video initially. I didn't have a groove or a melody or anything like that, and I started to sort of storyboard it, to do sketches of this idea. I was a big fan of silent movie stars, Chaplin, Keaton, Harold Lloyd, people like that, the sort of underdog heroes that would, evade the bully and get the girl.
Did you think you'd be able to get Magnus Pike? How early did he come into it?
Actually, pretty early. I mean, I found him in Central Casting catalogue. You could hire him by the hour or by the day, and so I initially had him.
But it's sort of an early version of Cameo.
Yeah, I had him do the recording first, and at the time I was I had a little studio in a trading estate in Earl's Court, West Ken, a sort of big Victorian trading estate, and you had to walk through a meat packing warehouse to get to it. And I had this little studio, and so I brought him there to do the recording, and he thought this was a bit beneath him to have to walk through a meat packing plant to do his vocal. But, I'm thinking, okay, union rates, mate, so he did it, but I did it on condition that he would do the video as well. And, he was a bit of a brat, to be perfectly honest. I remember when we were recording it, and he sort of, the first time he did it, I said, he had it written in front of him, and he said, okay, she blinded me with science. And I said, that's great, Dr. Pike. It's not really a question. It's sort of more of a statement. And he said, yes, but as known scientist, it'd be a bit surprising if the girl blinded me with science. I remember watching the VU meters, and I'm thinking, all right, that's going on the record, mate, no question.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then, on the day, he had to be out of there by noon, and he was more concerned about his taxi than anything else. And he refused to wear a white coat. In the storyboard, I had him wearing a white coat, and he said, my public don't view me that way. And then
now you just put one on him afterwards.
Yeah, but this is 16mm film. I don't think you could do that very easily those days. The last time I saw him was, I think it was probably at the BBC actually, and I asked him how he was, and he said, "I've just got back from America." And I said, "Oh, how was that?" And he said, "Well, it was." The thing is, Dolby, every time I walked down the street, somebody would come up behind me and go, "Science!" I said, "Oh, I mean, you didn't like that?" He said, "Well, it appears that your bloody MTV video is better known over there than my body of scientific work."
Wasn't it when you were editing the video for that, though, that you first met Michael Jackson? Because I know you've got some stories with knowing Michael.
Yeah, so I mean, I wrote and directed the video, and I was very fortunate that I was indulged by EMI, given enough rope to do this. And I did it with Limelight Films, who was sort of one of the hot production companies.
Yeah, we used Limelight. Was it Steve Barron, was it?
Yeah, I'm sure. Steve Barron directed the video for Billie Jean, which is the first single off Thriller. So at that point, Michael equaled, the Jacksons, off the wall, big hits, megastar, but not the global phenomenon that he became, within a year after that. So he was in London. Michael was in London because he wanted to be at the edit for Billie Jean.
I've got to hold you there because I know exactly what else he did. He went clubbing with my brother and Steve Strange at the exact same time.
Michael did.
And obviously this was, they walked the streets of the West End together. So this was, obviously he was famous, but not quite the guy that we all sort of know.
Well, not like when I worked with him, where I never actually met him because he was hiding behind the mixing desk and we all had to pretend he wasn't there.
So Gary, did they go to school dinners?
They went to the Limelight, I think. Not school dinners.
Okay. Because you remember before Club for Heroes, there were school dinners, and that was.
Right, yeah,
and there was a medieval one as well, wasn't there? Where in fact Dave Stewart used to play the lute dressed as a minstrel.
Anyway, we're ruining again. We're ruining your story. Carry on, Thomas.
Anyway, so Michael was in the edit suite next to me, and we literally met at the water cooler, and he had heard She Blinded Me with Science in clubs and on the radio in the US, and thought that I was an American guy, and so he's very surprised. And we talked a little bit, and he gave me his number, and I had a Filofax. Remember those? So I write, Michael Jackson and a 818 number in my Filofax. And then a few months after that, my song had come out in the US and had been a big hit, and I was summoned to go over there and do a TV show. And I was really sick. I had mono, which is glandular fever. And I had to do this live TV show in front of a live audience, miming to my song. But it was the 12-inch version of the song with the verses were back to front, and I was getting it wrong, and these kids were getting it right. It's just a terrible thing. I came off stage, felt like absolutely like death warmed up. And my entourage came back to the green room and sort of said, well, we thought we'd spend the evening we go to Carlos and Charlie's, and then we go down the Rainbow Rooms and see a couple of bands. And I'm like, I've actually arranged to see a friend tonight. I said, oh, you want to use the phone, And they're standing there, and I pull out my Filofax. I'm looking for an LA number to call. The first one I found, actually the only one I had, I think, was Michael Jackson. So I called. I thought I'm going to get a voicemail, and I'm going to have to fake, some appointment. And this voice goes, hello? And it was him. And so we start talking, and he goes, where are you? And I go, where are you? Burbank. We're in Burbank. He said, oh, that's very close to me. You should come over. And okay. I said, guys, can you drop me in Encino?
Encino, yeah.
So we go there. It's like 5 limousines, pull up to this gate on Encino. And they said, well, we could take you up to the house. So I'll walk up the drive. I didn't want 5 limos to show up at the front of the house. So they let me off, and it's pouring with rain. It was about a quarter of a mile up the drive to the house. So I get there, and it's like I'm absolutely sopping. And I look through the glass, to the side of the door, and there's like a big double staircase, like Busby Berkeley or something. And I ring the doorbell, and this little figure in a pink silk suit sort of comes down the stairs and opens the door. And he pulled me inside. I was literally had a pool of water around my feet. And he gave me a wad of paper towels.
This is like the beginning of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, isn't it? When they arrive at the house.
So, and then Michael proceeds to climb up into this chair that he's got. And it's like a throne that looks like it was designed for Henry VIII. Right, so he has to sort of climb up to get into it. And he's sitting there and he gives me an ottoman. So I'm sitting there on an ottoman dripping, and we proceed to have this amazing conversation. It's like there's all these art treasures around the room, but incoherent, like, a Darth Vader helmet and a Venetian gold clock,
Wow.
During the course of we're having a conversation about, Fairlights and synclaviers and things like that. And I'm sort of vaguely aware that there's little faces along the banisters. And I sort of look up, and they disappear. And look up again, and a door opens, and She Blinded Me With Science comes blasting out at about 120 decibels, and giggling. And then I realize there's a bunch of little kids peering through the banisters, and they're in their pajamas. And I say to Michael, what's the deal? And he goes, well, Thursday nights I have the neighbor kids over with their Tonka toys. He says, come on down, fellas, and down both sides of the staircase come about a dozen small children in pajamas. And they sit down on like the Persian rug between us, and they're playing with their cars. And he goes, you're telling me about the synclavier. And I'm sort of watching this. And every now and then he goes, Billy, don't do that. Yes, sorry, go on. Jimmy, share your toys.
Incredible.
And so it went on. And astonishing though this was, nothing about me struck it as creepy or sinister. Yeah. It was just, it was.
But it's like the Lost Boys.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
I don't want to sort of dive onto this too much, but I think so much of Michael genuinely was because there was never a childhood. He never had a childhood, so his entire life was just trying to find that childhood.
I was watching Edward Scissorhands the other night, and I realised that was sort of a parable about Michael, really.
I wanted to.
Is there a part of you thinking, "Fuck, I wish I'd gone to the Rainbow"?
You would have bumped into Guy Pratt if you had. I wanted to talk to you about working with Prefab Sprout as well, because
two legendary albums.
I mean, those 2 albums, Steve McQueen and Langley Park, and the work of Paddy McAloon is extraordinary. And I think you made 2 of the most. I mean, the sound on the album on Steve McQueen of the drums is beautiful, but also working with him as one of the greatest songwriters in pop music.
Well, thanks, Gary. I mean, that's great to hear you say that, and I know that you have an affinity with. I know from your music that you have a sort of natural, affinity with that stuff. But I mean, he is amazing. You don't have to be a musician to know how amazing he is. He's just really a phenomenon. And to me, it was like he was like a diamond in the rough, because he's almost like an idiot savant in terms of how incredibly complex his songwriting is, and the emotions underneath it, and the fascinating harmonies and chord sequences and stuff like that, and just the sort of depth of vision in the songs was just great. But it was very, very crude, and their first album that they did before they met me was almost sort of too didactic. It had too many key changes, rhythm changes, and it was partly because he'd brought in musicians who, Paddy just sort of strums and sings. He doesn't really notice how many beats are in a bar or how many bars are in a phrase.
It's very Sid Barrett.
Sid Barrett, he sometimes is in the middle of singing, he'll leap an octave for no real reason. And he was not aware of that. And the next time he plays the song, it's all different, And so he would have musicians come in, and the drummer would go, "Oh, Paddy, it's really interesting. It's like you've got an extra half bar, in there. But if I play a paradiddle, on my hi-hat, okay, all right, fine." And so I ended up with this sort of slight mishmash. And a lot of my job really was in the rehearsal room, just simplifying things, simplifying the structures, and actually getting them locked down. And as you well know, Gary, when you have a band if you have a great arrangement, for a song, the production to an extent takes care of itself, because if you mic it up properly, you get good levels and good sounds on things. And if the arrangement is great and the performance is great, you don't worry about the production. It's like you need great production when the original stinks. We went in a good studio, Marcus with a good engineer, and we mic'd everything up, and we did what they'd been doing in the rehearsal room. And it pretty much sounded like it sounds, with the exception that, I did a sort of top layer of stuff with keyboards and with the Fairlight sampling Wendy's voice and so on, which gave it this sort of sheen, to the top end, which, as it turns out, was a sound. It was very complimentary. And I think actually, I think there was during that period, there was this sense of sort of breathiness that you got from was that Art of Noise song, Moments in Love. The intro to True. It was this sort of soul breathiness and this glossy sheen you could get with a SSL desk that was very in vogue at the time, and thankfully you listen to it now and I think it still stands up.
I remember when we did. Sorry, Guy, I just wanted to talk about that True section that you're talking about, because your namesake gets involved in this as well. Because when we used to make records in that period, we put it through Dolby's, and then it'd come back and get the other way, and it'd lose all the top hiss. It'd have the noise taken out of it, which was inherent in the analog tapes. And I liked the sound I was hearing when the Dolbys weren't on coming back. It was all kind of. There was a lot of air and a lot of breathiness in it. So I remember saying to Tony Swain, the producer, can we get those vocals, those backing vocals, but just don't put the Dolby on when you play them back. And that's how we got that sound.
Yeah, Matt Langer taught me that same trick. He used to use that a lot on his stuff, on Def Leppard and things like that. That was an unintentional utility for Dolby Labs that they probably never intended.
Is that another reason for them to get cross with you? Well, no, because all I was going to say was just a broader point that how those, and especially the way you describe it, Thomas, is it's very much a testament to you as a producer in that you didn't impose yourself on. The reason those records are so great is that someone who you could have really imposed yourself on them. But what's so brilliant was how you just let Paddy be Paddy.
No, but I played them recently. I got them again on vinyl, and I was so knocked out by not just the songs. We all know the songs are great and the arrangements, but the clarity in that production is the space, the aural space, everything has in the landscape is perfect. I mean, bravo to you.
Thank you. I mean, I've always preferred two-speaker like, you know, surround systems and things. I think you can create a sound field with two speakers that is, you know, fully three-dimensional.
I would also.
Well, you got two ears, so.
You finally got to work with you work with Bowie, didn't you, at Live Aid? You finally got to work with one of your heroes. When did you first meet David? How did that happen?
So Matthew Seligman and Kevin Armstrong had played on Absolute Beginners, and I think, you know, Live Aid was not long after that, and Bowie's regular touring band, people like Earl Slick and so on, were off in the US doing other things. And he was in London, he's in England. He was shooting Labyrinth at Pinewood or Elstree or one of those things. So he was in, like, from 4 o'clock in the morning, he was in getting all his hair and makeup done and everything. And he was asked to do this gig, charity gig, 10 days hence, by Bob Geldof. And at the time he thought, oh, sounds like a worthwhile thing to do. You know, maybe I can promote my current single, which was Loving the Alien and everything. That you know, but I think over the course of the days, he realized it was a different kind of event altogether. And again, you know, hindsight, I mean, we were all aware it was going to be something huge, but I don't think anybody understood the scale of you know, Live Aid, the way
we
it ended
stupidly played a new song too. I mean, what were we thinking? Yeah, Jesus. Anyway,
but I mean, it's very easy in the mid, you know, to not see the wood for the trees. So I mean, we had him for 3 evenings at Nomis rehearsal studios for about 4 hours each, after a long day's filming at Pinewood, and the band that we put together, which included Prefab Sprouts, Neil Conti on the drums, and Matthew Seligman, Kevin Armstrong. We were of the generation that, you know, it was Bible to us. So I mean, he would come in and he'd sort of say, you know, I think I'd like to do, you know, Quicksand, and without looking down, we'd all start playing Quicksand. No, that's probably a bad idea. You know, how about China Girl? You know, it's like, and then so the 4 songs that we ended up doing, he never settled on those until the last rehearsal, which I think was like maybe the Thursday night before the Saturday gig. And we managed to play each of the songs that he wanted to play, but we'd never played them back to back. And, you know, when you're rehearsing routining stuff, you go through these phases where you can make them sound good after the 3rd or 4th time you played them, and then you can make them sound good the first time, but the final phase is making them sound good in any order, you know, so you can have a set, you know. So we were kind of nervous about this, but he had settled on the 4 songs and we all practiced them. And you know, by the way, literally as he and I stood at the side of the stage about to go on, he jabs me in the ribs. The plan was to do Modern Love first. He jabs me in the ribs. He said, let's start with TVC 1.
Oh my God.
It's like a honky tonk piano intro. And I'm looking at 120,000. This is like a nightmare, and a nightmare and a wet dream folded into. But I mean, the amazing thing was that, you know, I'd seen, you know, the Cracked Actor documentary on the BBC, and I'd seen him in the back of a limo with a carton of orange juice, being a complete strung out, you know, milk, okay, being a complete sort of strung out, you know, utter brat. And that's what I was expecting. And in fact, he walks in the room and he's like the perfect gentleman. You know, you if you cast him in a movie, you would cast Edward Fox. You know, he walks in, good evening, how is everybody? I thought we'd start off with Heroes. Should we play Heroes? Yes, please. and you know, complete and utter gentleman, and we're sort of amazed. And he although he plays all the instruments, he never came over to me and said, I think you got that chord inversion wrong or anything. He would just like smile and beam, and he was exuding light and wonderfulness. And we were all like, you know, puppy dogs basically, trying to make it sound good. The one exception to that was when we so London, as you probably remember, was a complete, you know, gridlock on the day of Live Aid. It's a beautiful sunny day and everything, but everywhere you went, every radio, every TV, you know, was blurting out about Live Aid, and the traffic jams up with the wazoo. So I was instructed to go to Battersea Heliport.
Yeah, that's where we flew from. Yeah,
going to fly into Wembley from there, and I get there, and Bowie's there, and he's no longer the English gentleman. He's now sort of starting to turn into the you know, hyper anxious sort of diva, and he had this hat pulled down over his head. We get in the helicopter, and he hated flying, right? And he hadn't. I think he's flying in airplanes by then, but he'd never flown a helicopter before.
But
And we get in this thing, and he was absolutely, terrified. He's like looking out the window, chain smoking, and the pilot says, "Could you extinguish your cigarettes, please, sir?" "Fuck off." He's going, "How long?" You said 12 minutes it takes. Are there any pylons or any sort of? No, perfectly safe. And so, I have this memory of him silhouetted in the window, chain smoking, as we banked over the Twin Towers of Wembley. And in fact, when that Queen movie came out, a couple of years ago, Bohemian Rhapsody, they had this sort of fake drone shot flying into Wembley Stadium that they'd done with CGI. And I thought that was actually my view, except I had Bowie in profile in there, complaining about the flight. But then we didn't land sort of actually at Wembley. It was like a few blocks away. And then we got a sort of motorcade through the back streets of Wembley with motorbikes and those sort of bollards that are just wide enough for a limo to get through. And we're doing like 80 miles an hour in the back streets of Wembley. And he's going, "Oh, I love this bit. This is great." So, he's fine with that. And then we screeched to a halt at Wembley Stadium, and you can see like 100 paparazzi converging on the car. And he looks at me, he says, "This is great." And he opens the door and goes out, and he's sort of, he's the
all right. So it's not slow down, Arthur, stick to 30.
He famously dropped a number, didn't he, so Bob could play the Cars video.
I don't remember anything about that, actually. I remember the 4 songs that we actually did, right. But there may have been a plan to play another one.
Oh no, there was one dropped. So there wasn't. You didn't have any. So you didn't have like an A and B list in case anything happened. Quick, go to Genie.
I mean, I do remember that. So Heroes, which is a deceptively simple song. Sometimes simple songs are the easiest to get wrong. It's like if it was Life on Mars, there's a chord sequence that you can follow, But Heroes is sort of basically an A and a B section. Yeah. But sometimes it's this long and sometimes it's that long. And to go into the B section, you get this riff which goes doo 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 doo, right? And I was playing that on the synth, and I thought, okay, it's going to be just my luck that I stick that in the middle of a verse. He turns around and gives me a dirty look, and a fine like James Brown. But I mean, I got there on stage, and it's just, I was absolutely on autopilot, It was just a fantastic experience.
Actually, Thomas, because we talked about you because you have this love of electronics and electronic music in the beginning. But was there an actual musical moment for you first, before the electronics or anything? Did you have any sort of, like, all the Americans we have saw the Beatles and Ed Sullivan or whatever? Or
I don't think so, really. I mean, I liked, quirky individualist songwriters from Joni Mitchell to Captain Beefheart, to Dan Hicks to Van Morrison. I like stuff that really defied genres, that had very personal lyrics that were sort of unexpected. Yeah. And where the music was interesting, but the music was sort of there to serve the story and the song.
But that's quite sophisticated, hard to find stuff, I would have thought, isn't it, back then?
Yeah, I mean, you could find it. I mean, fortunately, back then, there were only a couple of 100 albums a year came out at all. Relatively easy compared to these days. I think one of the main things about it was that I didn't know if they charted those records. I didn't really care about the charts. I didn't care if they're on the radio. They were very personal to me. And if I met people that, I go to the gigs, and if I got talking to people that loved them as well, they became my people. I sort of bonded with other people that saw it as well. But it was it's a bit of a curse as well, because a lot of music I don't like, really. I mean, most genres of music, I don't like them. And often I find myself sort of saying, oh, if only heavy metal sounded like this, I would like it. Or if only, mariachi sounded like this, I would like it.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
I use a lot of different musical idioms in my own music. And often that's me sort of saying just that. It's like, well, if bossa nova sounded like this, I'd dig it.
Oh, right. Or Zydeco. You've used Zydeco stuff, haven't you?
Yeah.
When I knew you, we used to when I knew you,
you were much nicer.
Yeah, when we used to hang a little bit together, Thomas. When I lived in LA and you lived in LA back in the early 90s, I remember sitting on a beach with you, with our families, and our kids. And you said something to me about you had this idea of, or you were working on, where you would play a computer game and the music would change depending on the mood of where you were going in the computer game. And I remember thinking, wow, that's going to be really tough. But that was the world you were walking into and you were going into when I knew you. You were sort of heading towards Silicon Valley, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I was frustrated with the music industry. I mean, this would have been when, Gary, sort of 1990-ish?
Yeah, early 90s.
Yeah. So, I'd probably peaked commercially at that time. I wasn't really playing the game. The record companies and managers and stuff would have liked me to sort of come up with a cookie cutter version of what I'd been most successful with, and so that they could really sell, like Soap Powder. And I wasn't really willing to do that because, I'm sort of very much compelled to stretch out and be experimental. And so I'd never really fit into that sort of formula. But I was using technology, in my music. I was using, Macs and MIDI software and things like that. And I was working a little bit with people like DigiDesign and Opcode and the companies that made that software. And I was I started consulting with them. I was living in LA, but I was going back and forth to Silicon Valley, and I was working with them on upcoming, soft versions of their software. And I got fascinated with that bit of it. And so I really wanted to start making my own. So I was drawn more and more to Silicon Valley. It was at a time when there were new potential forms of entertainment, like sort of video games, CD-ROMs, and, VR and different immersive interactive environments. And I've always been drawn to, the possibilities that a new technology brings, whether it's the Fairlight, whether it's MTV videos, whether, whatever. It's like, as an artist, I think, I wonder what I could do with that. So I loved the idea of interactive music where, rather than somebody's brain sort of creating this linear flow to things, stuff happening in real time and injecting technology, so that the artist now, instead of creating this sort of linear landscape, you inject yourself somehow into the software. And then your mind is sort of at work while the player is doing what they do. That really appealed to me.
There's a brilliant video up on YouTube for people to go to of you singing what I think is absolutely fantastic song, "Love Is a Loaded Pistol."
Thank you.
Which was what album?
I'm glad somebody noticed, Gary. That's great.
What album is that on?
It's from A Map of the Floating City.
Gorgeous record. It's
with a string quartet.
Yeah, and your performance is fantastic on there.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Well, also, I think we should give a comment to the thing you've just done with Todd Rundgren.
Oh my God, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Which is amazing, which we love. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's great.
That riff, that bass riff, is so intoxicating.
Well, it goes on for 6 minutes or something, so it would need to be.
Yeah.
Brilliant image in that video as well. It's fantastic.
I was kind of, he told me about that animation. I sort of thought it was going to be like a whole story, It's like I was waiting for something to happen. It's like,
there is an element of that.
Yeah, but it's kind of freaky. I liked it. It was engrossing. Yeah. But the song is brilliant. We love Todd.
Thank you. I'd never actually worked with him. I'd sort of rubbed shoulders with him a couple of times, and then he was doing this album, with some collaborations, and he said, "Did I have anything lying around?" And I had this song that I hadn't really finished, "I'm Not Your Dog," at the time of A Map of the Floating City. And I sent him an MP3, and he said, "Great, I'd love to work on this. Can you send me some stems?" And it's like, I think that hard drive got wiped years ago. It's like, so the MP3 is all I've got. And he said, "Okay, well, I'll see what I can do with that."
Did you not meet? Was it all?
Not for this one. No, not for this. Although actually, I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks because he's currently on tour, doing a Bowie tribute tour with Adrian Belew and Scroat, and they're playing close to here in Annapolis. So I started come and guest on a couple of songs.
We're playing in Indianapolis.
No, soon. Annapolis.
Not Indianapolis.
Annapolis.
Yeah. Big.
Has he still got the full guitar, by the way? Didn't he have that Eric Clapton, George Harrison guitar for a bit? Anyway, but please tell him to be a raconteur. We need him on the show, Thomas.
For sure. Yeah, I will definitely do that.
That's assuming you haven't had a miserable time.
And are you guys actually coming through this neck of the woods on this tour?
I feel Washington, we played.
We did Washington and Boston and Philadelphia.
Thomas, it's been absolute pleasure having you on Rockonteurs.
Really, really, really brilliant. I know we could go on for hours, especially we've only just opened up the tech box.
Well, great to catch up with you guys, and good luck with the rest of your tour.
So, are you a professor now? Is that what you're?
It's like I'm the only, I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins, and I'm the only one without a PhD. In fact, I left school at 16. We had like a graduation ceremony the other day, and we get our rented gowns and caps and everything. And I'm looking for mine on the rack, and mine, I haven't got like a fancy scarf. And I said, "Where's my scarf?" And they said, "That's actually your college alum. Is what's on your scarf." And I'm like, "Oh." Yeah. So I'm like in a line of 30 professors. I'm the only one in a black gown with no scarf.
People,
I thought that was kind of...
But your parents would be happy you got a proper job finally.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Thomas. All the best.
All right.
Oh, lovely man.
Very lovely man. Fantastic. And again, we barely scratched the surface, as is our catchphrase.
Yeah. So what are you going to do for the rest of the day in Detroit before the gig tonight?
I don't know. I might have a little walk around, go to the gym. I don't know.
Because before,
it's not very nice out there. It's not very nice out there, Gal.
I've done it
because we usually go to. I've been to Motown twice now.
Yes, it's great. We did it last time, didn't we? The Motown Studios, fantastic tour. If anyone ever gets a chance to be in Detroit, go and do the Motown tour. You get to see the room where it happened.
And I actually got to lie down on the spot where James Jamerson had to lie on the floor because he was too drunk to sit on a chair to play the bass to What's Going On.
Yeah, but that's a good story in itself, because wasn't it written by 2 in the morning or something?
It's when they'd only just gone into sort of like 60s working hours, because Motown was very much a 9-to-5 operation, and the Funk Brothers used to go and do various jazz and soul gigs around town, and they were playing, and apparently Marvin came up with What's Going On, and it was about midnight or something, and of course they didn't have mobiles or anything. So they called every club in town till they found the one where they were playing. And they got, I've forgotten his name, the drummer. And he goes, "Listen, you guys need to get back here. Marvin's on this tip, and it's not. He's got to get it down now." They say, "Well, James is kind of drunk." I don't care. No, he's really drunk. And so they turn up, and James is given this chart, and he just can't see it. And it's sort of, and he can't sit on a chair to play. He just keeps sliding off. So they just lie him down on the ground. He basically lies on the floor on his back, with his eyes closed, and plays arguably one of the greatest bass lines of all time.
Well, that's why you're a raconteur. Okay, I want to thank Ben, our producer, and Stu for manning the controls today. I think Ben's off on honeymoon. Is that the case? Maybe.
Yes, he is. Yes,
Ben Jones. And we have another show we're recording in Toronto in a I think very soon.
Yeah, hopefully, and a very fitting one for where we're going to be as well. So yeah, we're still going to keep bringing it to you, people.
It's good night from me,
and good night from them.